So before we have a lot to do, as usual, but before we dive in, probably good for us to introduce ourselves for folks that don't know us. Heather, do you want to jump in?
Sure. My name is Heather Hargraves. I am a clinical and rehabilitation psychologist here in London, Ontario, Canada. A lot of my research centered around like dissociation, PTSD, psychedelics, meditation, and of course the interface with brain-computer interfaces, particularly neurofeedback. And I met Jeff, years ago now. I'm not even sure, 2016?
7 or 8 years ago?
Yeah. So when I found his work, it just branched so nicely into the research that I was doing. And then as we were working together and I learned and started teaching neuromeditation, there was always this hope and goal that we could eventually make this affordable and remote. And then 4 years ago, with our current CEO, Alex Nee, I had met him through the grapevine, and when COVID started, there was a real interest to try to move this forward. So here we are.
Here we are. Mm-hmm. And my name's Jeff Tarrant. I'm a psychologist and neurofeedback practitioner. Been in this field for a while. Doing neurofeedback for, 25 years or so, something like that. I'm not actually sure anymore. And started the NeuroMeditation Institute right about when I met Heather. So, whatever, 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. And it really, that whole process really got started with this idea of combining meditation with neurofeedback. That's actually how the whole neuromeditation thing started. And then it branched off from there and became a little bit broader in terms of how we approach things. But I've always kind of stayed in this area of this work and of meditation with neurofeedback. And so, yeah, the process that we're going to introduce you guys to today, kind of as Heather mentioned, it's pretty exciting because one of the things that has always been a little bit challenging with this work is that if you're using a clinical neurofeedback system, which I love and I have and I use, but it's kind of cumbersome. The software is not the easiest thing in the world. It's expensive. There's goop. It's difficult. And so really the only real way to do it is to have people come into your office, which is very limiting. So anyway, Heather and I are super excited because this new system makes life so much easier. And, like she said, there's been some bumps along the road. It's been a 4-year process, but really excited about where things are now. And so excited to share that with you. So what we were going to do is have a very brief for me, PowerPoint slide just to kind of orient everybody, especially those of you that really maybe aren't familiar with some of this work or maybe aren't in the neurofeedback world. It's going to be brief. And then we want to do a live demo so you can actually see what the heck we're talking about. And so that's going to be the bulk of it. We're going to try to save a few minutes at the end for questions and discussion around this. So hopefully that will work. Obviously, if you're just dying, you got to have an answer to something, let us know, flag us, throw something digitally at us or something so that you get our attention because we want to make sure that we answer your questions. Okay, I'm going to start by sharing the slide deck here. Okay, so I'm going to start us off. I'm going to lead us off here, and then Heather will take over. You got that? Heather's going to monitor the waiting room. So let's start at the beginning, shall we? So the first thing that we want to talk about is defining meditation, which obviously that's the whole point of this is meditation with technology, with neurofeedback. And for us, meditation can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different systems. And so for us, the definition that we use is that meditation is a systematic mental training designed to challenge habits of attending, thinking, feeling, and perceiving. Now, that's also a broad definition, but there's a couple of things that we feel like are useful in this. One is thinking of it as mental training. right? That it's an exercise. It's an exercise for your brain, for your internal states of consciousness and awareness. And a lot of what we're doing, regardless of what the particular style of meditation is you're learning to pay attention in different ways, right? You're shifting out of the normative way that you move through your day into something different. So you're challenging all of those habitual patterns in the way that you engage. So at a real basic level, all meditations, I think, have this in common. Now, as we're going to talk about later, we in the system work with a variety of different meditation styles, and each of those do something a little bit different. However, they still have this in common. And then, of course, neurofeedback is basically biofeedback. And biofeedback is any kind of system where you are getting information about your physiology, some aspect of your physiology, in real time so that you can learn to modulate your own nervous system. So if you can see what your nervous system is doing, you can change it, right? And so neurofeedback is just doing that with brain waves. That's the basic idea there. So what we know is that combining these things can essentially enhance them both. And there's a lot of overlap, right? Because with neurofeedback, you're getting information about your brain waves, which is giving you information about your internal state, which is what meditation is doing as well, right? So by combining these, we can really, I think of it as a power tool, right? You don't have to use neurofeedback with meditation, but it can make life a lot simpler, and it can really expand your practice quickly in a way that I think is often difficult on your own. So I didn't want to go too far into some of the nerdy research stuff, but for those of you that are interested in this, it seemed like important to bring up. Because really the foundation of what we're doing here is taking some of the information that we've gained from the research literature as well as our own experiences to develop these protocols and approaches. And this is one example, right? So this article, Source Space EEG NeuroFeedback links subjective experience with brain activity during effortless awareness meditation. So the part of the point of bringing this up is that researchers are looking at this, right? Is what we're doing, combining neurofeedback with meditation, is it useful? Does it actually do what it's supposed to do? And the answer is yes. We know that from our practice, but it's nice to have some data that backs it up, right? So in this particular study, they had people hooked up and they were monitoring their brainwave activity, specifically gamma, really fast brainwave, in the posterior cingulate. So at the very back of the head, the hub of the default mode network, for those of you familiar with that. And what they found was that when they gave feedback to people about the activity, because gamma is a good metric for looking at activation in that part of the brain. And so what they found was that when they monitored this and showed it to people, gave people some sort of a visual representation of what was happening in their posterior cingulate, it was actually really useful. So they found that both novice and experienced meditators showed decreased activity, decreased gamma in that posterior cingulate when they were actually engaged in the meditation. So when they were doing the effortless awareness practice, which in our categorization scheme would be like a mindfulness practice, when they were doing that, there was this decrease of activity in the posterior cingulate. They also found that both groups were able to control the signal. So they were able to control that gamma signal in the PCC by practicing the meditation. So I really like this article because it was one of the first ones that clearly demonstrated that this works, right? That if you monitor certain things in the brain and you feed it back to people, it can be paired with meditation to enhance the process. Here's another one that was even earlier, actually, earlier than the study that we just mentioned. And in this one, they were actually using real-time FMRI neurofeedback. Now, it's kind of cool that they were doing that, but you know, who has a real-time fMRI machine and who wants to meditate in one of those, right? So, but the point is they found kind of a similar thing. So what they did was they were, again, monitoring activation in the posterior cingulate and having people do a focus meditation. So a little bit of a different style, a little bit different than mindfulness. And they were showing them visual information, which you can kind of see on the screen here, showing their activity in the posterior cingulate. So when there was increased activity, then the line would go up and it's red. When there's decreased activity, the line would be blue and it would go down. And you can see the degree to which it shifted up or down. And so what they found was that both meditators and non-meditators reported that there was, they reported an activation of the PCC when there were mind wandering. So I said that wrong. They reported mind wandering when there was an increase of activity in the PCC, right? So what they would do is interrupt the meditators periodically and say, what's going on? What are you doing in your meditation? And at those timestamps where it's like, oh man, I was like thinking about what I'm going to watch on Netflix tonight. There was clearly an increase of activity there. At the same time, there was a deactivation when they were engaged in the meditation. So in this particular case, they found that the experienced meditators were able to control the signal, not necessarily the non-meditators. Although I would make an argument, because if you look at this graph that's on the screen, you can clearly see that the meditators, the experienced meditators, at the very beginning, they were off and on, it was kind of up and down, and then they were like dropped in, right? You can see it. They dropped in and then it's like, whoa, there's just this like iceberg of, decreased activity that just gets deeper and deeper and deeper as the meditation continues. Now with the non-meditators, it's nowhere near as dramatic, which you wouldn't expect. They don't know what they're doing, right? But what's interesting is that if you compare the first half of the session to the second half, to me, sure looks like there's more of a decrease in the second half than the first. So even though it didn't come up as statistically significant, it still, to me, looks like it's relevant, right? That people were figuring it out. They were getting it. And that's actually, I think Heather would confirm this from her experience. This is kind of what we see with folks. It usually takes them a couple of sessions to figure it out. The first session, it's like, what am I doing? And they're distracted by the feedback and they don't know what's going on. And then after a session or two, it's like they start to lock in and they get it, right?
And they're surprised. It's kind of a fun thing to be like, what were you just thinking about? And they're, what? How do you I'm thinking about something. I'm like, well, it just changed. So it's clinically, it's a really nice tool to start building that relationship, the client feeling seen and like co-constructing a narrative around their attentional states and like what is it that interrupts their state. So it really makes it easy to fine tune that for people. And when you think of it from like an IFS perspective, it's easier than to catch parts, essentially.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. And this slide is actually Heather's. These are all her pictures. And the reason we have it here is because this is what we were doing, right? So this is using a BrainMaster System, and it's cool, right? You got these 3D head images. You can use S-Loretta to look at really specific parts of the brain, and it's sexy. It's really, it's cool. But look at this setup, right? Like you got to have this 19 electrode, headgear, and you got to put goop in it, or at least get all of these sensors wet, and you got to have this complicated equipment. So this is what we were doing.
And I'll say this is in the UK at a conference, a breaking convention conference. So I used to travel around with a wheelie bag. And whenever I'd have to go through airport security, I would look at the people behind me. I'm like, 1 second. And then I would take up 7 bins. And people would be like, first monitor, here's my laptop, here's my amplifier, here's my wires, here's my gel. And they'd be like, what on earth are you doing? I was like, I'm a neurofeedback therapist. Like, give them really no further clarification. So like, yeah, where we are now is lovely, but I can put this all in my pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, here's the thing, right? And so actually the picture here is of a friend of mine named Kat. And this is one of the caps that we use now. We actually we'll show you in a minute, there's actually a pretty wide range of different types of devices you can use. But this is one of them. And so anyway, this idea of remote EEG neuromeditation, there's a few things that we think are really important about this. And so, I got a few bullets here, right? But so the first thing is providing some sort of objective insight into your meditation process. And, Heather kind of alluded to this, but it's really interesting when you start looking at brainwave activity and you're helping people figure out their meditation. Because what inevitably happens, well, at least for most people, is that when they think they're meditating, whatever they were doing before that they thought was meditation wasn't necessarily meditation, right? Something was going on. But it's interesting because when you start to give them feedback and you start to see what's happening, and they can start to see what's happening, they can learn to find whatever that space is, right? If you're on your own, you may not be able to find it. You don't necessarily know where it is. You're kind of going by your own subjective, response. And if you don't know where you're going, how do you know what it is, right? It's tricky to find it. Obviously, there's some accelerated learning for beginners. So if you've never meditated before or you're relatively new, again, back to that same issue, it can be really difficult to figure out what the heck you're doing. And I hear this all the time from people that are like, I don't know, am I doing it right? And it's like, well, how do you know? How do you know? So being able to help people figure that out can really speed things up. Personalization and tailored feedback. So we'll get into that, right? But it's really nice that this can be more personalized. It doesn't have to be sort of a shotgun approach that it's like, well, we have one thing and it's going to apply to everybody. So there's different protocols that we can use. Those protocols can be modified, for particular individuals based on their brain patterns or whatever. But even the feedback can be individualized. Not everybody's going to like the same thing, or they're not going to respond to the same type of audio feedback or visual feedback. Obviously, this can be much more engaging. And, honestly, I mean, I've been meditating for a long time. And every time I put this on, it's like, it's so much easier. I'm like, why don't I do this every time? Right? Because it's just, it is more engaging. And even at a very bare minimum, regardless of what the protocol is that we're using, when you start getting information about what's happening, it makes you pay attention differently, right? Just from the beginning, you're paying attention different because you're getting feedback. So, that's really great. And then of course it can increase your motivation because you're getting information. You can see, oh, I'm actually doing it. I'm reducing the activity in my posterior cingulate or whatever it is that we're looking at. And so that can be super rewarding. Or you can see that it's like, oh, I'm holding the state longer and longer and longer. We can measure that, right? So that can be really encouraging. Obviously, there's some practical applications for various mental health or peak performance things. We know that meditation is good for all sorts of things. You wouldn't be sitting here in this webinar if you didn't think that, right? Like everybody here gets that meditation is good for you. And so again, we've tried to identify specific approaches that might be targeted for specific concerns or goals. Now, I've got an asterisk here because we can use this as a mental health intervention, but of course, we should only be doing that if you have a license to treat mental health concerns. So it's an important distinction that, we like to emphasize, right? That even though, of course, meditation is helpful, but if you're taking that specific angle, you need to have a license where you kind of know what you're talking about there. And then, of course, the last one, democratizing meditation. So, this is important, and I think it's really useful with this remote approach because we can work with anybody anywhere. You're not limited. You're not limited to geography or where there happen to be teachers or whatever is available. And in fact, in the demo we're going to do, Heather is going to be the client. She's going to be the student, and I'm going to be the instructor, right? And so we're going to do a live demo. And what you'll see is that, I'm in Oregon, she's in Canada. We're 3 time zones away, but you'll see how this works, remotely. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, Heather.
All right. So essentially, we're going to start moving towards this combination that we've been able to put together between Divergence and the NeuroMeditation Institute. So Divergence has allowed for this remote option, and it is a full neurofeedback suite, essentially. So people who are neurofeedback practitioners can just kind of hop on the Divergence platform on its own and start, delivering protocols to different clients. We partnered with the NeuroMeditation Institute to put a suite on the Divergence platform. So there are other options on the Divergence platform, but the NeuroMeditation one is unique in that it really offers that support for honing and developing your meditation practice, and probably the first one that we've really fine-tuned based on a lot of the feedback from clinicians and users to try to make it as easy as possible. And the headsets have also become a lot easier to use with quicker connections and Bluetooth applications, baseball caps, easy to put on and move forward with or travel with. But I also think that we are moving in a direction too where some of this is likely to even become more automated, and we're going to be able, where client feedback starts like feeding into the EEG. So this is our first iteration, but I think we're really on a journey to make this the relational technology that we've both been talking about for a long time. The idea here too is to allow technology to become something that helps you remember yourself and remember your body, deeper states of awareness, and how your attention impacts your relationship with yourself and the world around you, not just using technology in a way where it just like holds you in a sympathetic state, keeping everything still, and then takes your attention away from you and actually breaks up your capacity to hold your attention in one place. So that's an exciting piece for me, to start using technology in a much more supportive way to regulate our own nervous systems, because I don't really believe our current uses offer that. Jeff, will you be the slide master? Thank you. So this is kind of what our app looks like, and you're going to see it in a moment. So on the left is really what the client sees. So that external focus eyes open was one of our original feedback options, where you would make the flame brighter or dimmer based on your ability to like kind of drop your alpha in your posterior cingulate or drop your gamma, whatever the neuromeditation protocol was. We have kind of moved forward now where we have videos. So the clinician can upload a whole array of YouTube videos that clients can choose from, but we also have the option for background mode. So now clients can actually just switch out of their system, like out of the app, and then watch Netflix or watch YouTube or listen to Spotify, like anything that they can do on their phone. They could read the newspaper or something like that, an article to help them focus their attention. We've made it a lot more flexible and dynamic. When we demo today, we'll just be using a YouTube video to keep it simple, but we are in the process of also bringing on some games. So we're going to start onboarding games that allow you to play with characters and do different things when you're in your different meditative states. And the sound interfaces, I think, are also going to really become richer too in time. So after you do the protocol, for example, like the person would watch the neuromeditation, they make their flame change. Then at the end, they get like a little congratulations, you are done, and then the app over time will track. But on the clinician's platform, they can watch the EEG live. So the client can train without the clinician, but the clinician can also be completely involved during the session remotely, as we're going to show you. And over time, it will actually track client progress and give different metrics and feedback as they go.
Just to make one clarifying comment in case folks aren't familiar with kind of this stuff, the way the feedback works if you're choosing a YouTube video or something like that is that it basically dims in and out. Same with the audio. So that's your signal. So that if you're in the zone, whatever the zone is, then the screen is all the way bright, the volume's up. And then when you lose focus or whatever, then the audio starts to decrease, the screen dims out, right? So that's your feedback of like, oh, am I in the right zone or not? That's why we can use any number of different videos options, because they all have that in common, where we can use the dimmer option. Mm-hmm. There'll be some other games and things coming as well, but really for meditation, we don't really need anything more complicated than this. You want to keep it pretty simple. if you make it too stimulating or interesting, you're not going to be meditating. So,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
we got to keep it kind of simple.
Yeah.
All right.
So what we've packaged together is like a full training. So when the client gets going, we won't go through this process today live, but they will be offered kind of a battery of questionnaires. So they'll get the NeuroMeditation styles inventory, which will help you as a clinician or the client decide which meditation is best for them to start with. Then we're also keeping track of psychological flexibility as well as like alexithymia. So I don't know if everyone's aware of what alexithymia is, but it's the inability to identify the difference between bodily states and emotional states. And alexithymia is kind of this thing that underpins a majority of different mental health challenges. And it's actually considered a trait. It's not a mental health condition, but different people have different degrees of alexithymia. So one way to conceptualize it is to imagine that, you know, you're a camera and you're meant to take photos at night, and like that film is meant for night. And so someone who's high on alexithymia has a real sensitivity to light, but then suddenly they're bright in the day, and they're trying to take pictures with this camera that's meant for nighttime photography, and it just overwhelms their film. So helping to identify that in a client can really help them understand why certain things might be more triggering and overwhelming. And I think I have found as a clinician that the NeuroMeditation Suite is really helpful for those individuals to help them discern those differences. So the scale will offer that. And then we have like symptom questionnaires, and the Divergence in general offers a bunch of questionnaires that you can dole out to clients at any point in time if you want to track progress over different sessions. We have the 6 ready-made NMI protocols, which come with real-time training options for stronger patient connection. And each of these can be customized depending if you're in the clinician platform or the coaching platform. They do have different degrees of adaptability. But these 6 NMI protocols are kind of like the core ones that we've been working with all of these years, and they do map on to a lot of the core meditations that we currently practice. And then over time, like I mentioned, you can track. Once a client has done about 4 protocols, we have these really cool metrics that let you look through all of their different brain waves and how good their signal strength was, how long they might have been in a deep attentional state, and Jeff will kind of demonstrate some of that. We already talked about the inventories, and then we are looking at adding this EEG-based biomarker progression and tracking. And I think over time, we're going to look to add a little bit of research to this, where we can collect some of this data to help enrich and move forward some of like the new developments that we come up with next. So again, we'll be able to, exactly what I just said, analyze neuro data and questionnaires to kind of drive personalized treatment and continue to make this a lot more interactive for each individual using it.
Yeah, and one simple way of thinking about that is if you, for instance, if you sent a client the NeuroMeditation styles inventory at the beginning, and it came back and said, oh, you should start with open heart meditation. Okay, fine. And so they do that for 10 or 15 or 20 sessions or whatever they do, and you give them the NMSI again. Well, now it might come back and say, oh, now we recommend quiet mind, right? So something has changed about your client that you can assess and go like, oh, maybe it's time to change protocols. You know, so maybe we shift to something different. So again, you can use this as a way to kind of personalize the approach and get more targeted.
These are all of our different headsets currently that exist on the platform. The way we've been framing this is that we see the hardware on our platform like cell phones. So we're a software suite, and we offer different hardware options which give a range of prices, but also different sensor setups. And some of them are just easier for people than others, like the baseball cap and the band, for example. They're pretty simple. I have the cap here, which is what I'll be demonstrating with today. And there's like a little sensor on the inside, but it is connected through a magnet. So you can just move it to any location you need with your client. And then there's like an ear clip. The Flex has more sensors on it, and those give a lot more flexibility, which can also give you a little more targeted training when we have a few more sensor sites. And each of the neuro meditations is usable with each of these kind of caps. So it'll drop down when you pick the neuro meditation, and you get to actually choose from the different caps. So your clients can have whatever cap and it will work with all of them. So you can let clients choose what might be best for them or make those recommendations. And we expect there to be more and more adding to the platform all the time, including, I think, the Synchrony Uno and the Trios are going to have HRV. So eventually we're going to have HRV integration in the next few months as well.
Well, and there's a full cap coming down the road too. Yeah, the Dragon. So for those of you who are really wanting to get heavy duty, that'll be available in the near future.
Yeah, and so Ali has a question. No, you don't need to have all the caps. So if someone just has the baseball cap, all the neuro meditations work with the baseball cap. Like, we've done the work in the background that whatever device your client has, it's just a click and point for you as a clinician. So we've made the variety easy for everybody using the platform, and that increases options for your patients.
Yeah, one reason why it's nice to have different options, aside from the ease of use, is that, you know, for some people they may also be doing more of clinical neurofeedback, and so you may need different options or want different options or want more electrode sites or whatever. So it's nice to have different choices depending on what your use case is.
I will often partner the neuro meditations with then some more clinical neurofeedback, and I get my clients to do them in the progression. So these are our 6 main protocols. We got our focus, eyes open, eyes closed, mindfulness, open heart, quiet mind, and deep state. So anyone who's done some training with the Neuro Meditation Institute already, like, the framework is pretty much staying the same. And that way it's easy for you to translate on. And if not, you know, just the courses that we're offering will inform you of what each of these are.
All right, I think we're ready to do a demo and show you guys what the heck this is.
Hey.
Which we'll make it much more concrete, right? So we wanted to do a little bit of a setup, so you had the basics. And so, yeah, while I'm kind of sharing a different screen here, Heather is putting on her cap. Do you want to talk about what you're doing, Heather?
So with the baseball cap, honestly, it's probably but outside of the band, the easiest to use. But even the flex, like, you just pull it onto your head. But this one just has one sensor, and for the neuro meditations, one sensor can go a long way. And the only thing you have to do is kind of like wiggle it around to make sure that it's touching your scalp. We've learned over time that they are dry sensors, but they tend to work best when they're a little bit warm. So if I get it on my head now and give it a minute or so, I'll have a much better connection. And if you're ever having connection issues, just a little bit of water, either on your ear or kind of where the sensor is going to be, can go a really long way to take those connection issues away.
And if you couldn't see, these sensors kind of look like this.
Little combs.
Yeah, so they're little combs and they're springy. So they actually kind of give when they touch your hair, but this allows it to get through your hair down to the scalp in a very effective way. So that's kind of what the sensors look like in in most of these headsets that we showed you. Okay, can you guys see my screen right now? Is it on? Yeah, you can see it. Okay, great. So this is a test platform right here. So the reason I'm saying that is because there's names on here. These are all just like guinea pig people in development, right? These aren't clients. In fact, we went to a lot of work to make sure we weren't going to accidentally bring up something with somebody's name on it, right? So these names are all just test things.
But we do have a privacy mode, so yeah.
So there's a privacy mode over here where you can kind of X out most of the name. So that, you know, you can hide it if you need to. So this is kind of, now obviously there's a step that we're not going to show you just because of time, where I made Heather a client, right? Which I do on my platform. This is the therapist side of things, or the clinician side of things. And so I made Heather a client, which is very easy to do. It's like any other software. I make her a client. It sends her an invitation through her email. She accepts it, and then it essentially links us together. It links her system with my system. And so it's actually really simple to do that. But we already did that in advance. And actually, just because of this is a test environment, Heather is actually me. So her account is the Jeff Tarrant down here. That's her, even though she's got her name on here. But we're using the Jeff Tarrant one. So I just want to show you how simple it is to kind of set this up, right? So Heather's my client. Our Jeff is my client. And so the first thing I want to do is make a session for her. And so there's lots of ways to do this, but the way I usually do it, and the easiest way, is to click on Sessions. It says, okay, manage your sessions. All right. So it's loading everything up right now. Okay, there's everything that has been created. Now I don't need to manage that. I want to make a new one. So I create a session, click this button over here. What's the session name? So for this one, we're going to do an eyes open focus meditation. So I'm just going to name it that, eyes open focus, but I'm going to call it 2 because there's already one that's on her platform. So this is eyes open focus 2. Then I select the device. So here's all of the headsets options. Now Heather is using the Colibri. That's the single sensor baseball cap one, right? That's the name of it. So I'm going to select that. So this is the way the software knows which electrodes to use and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Then select clients. All right. There's Jeff. Okay. Select that. Submit. Next. Okay. There's different ways to tell it. So, you know, Heather's my client, right? And she's in Canada. And, you know, so I can say, well, I'm going to give you a certain number of sessions and you can use them however you want. You could run, you know, 10 sessions a day. Or I can say, oh, I'm going to specify that this protocol is for certain days of the week. Or I can set it up on a calendar. So there's a lot of flexibility on how you send this out to the people you're working with. In this case, I'm going to say, oh, we'll do the maximum number of allowed runs. Heather, I'm going to give you 30 sessions.
Woo.
Yeah. Go crazy. Go crazy. Yeah. So, okay, create the new session. And it's working on it. There it is. Okay, now I got to tell it, all that the session did was create essentially a folder, right? That says, oh, here's what's going to hold this information. But now I got to tell it what to do. You know, all I did was give it a name, but I didn't tell it what to do. So here's where the protocols are. Now, the first thing that pops up is custom. So if you made your own protocol, if you have a clinician license, you can make your own protocols. Okay, but I click on this as a drop down. Here's NMI. There's also True Bearing, which is another set of clinical protocols that are pre-made. So if you're a clinician, but in this case, we want NMI. And then you see it populates with all of the different neuromeditation sessions. And so I want eyes open focus because that's what we just established. And look, it says add for Colibri. It doesn't give you any other options because I already told it we're working with the Colibri. All right, so I'm going to add for the Colibri. It just loaded over here. Says that's what you chose. Is that what you want? Yep, that's what I want. I'm going to submit that. Give it a second. And we should be good to go.
Yep.
I got to find where it's at on here. It doesn't really matter. There's 110 things on here. I guess I could do a search.
Search, capital S.
Was it? Does it matter if I do capital? So there it is. Eyes open, focus 2. You can see, you know, I could go in and mess with it if I want, or I could deactivate it. Okay. So at this point, it just sent that protocol to Heather because we're connected, or to Jeff, however you want to think about it. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. Heather's going to share her phone because that's where she's running it from, is her phone, so that you can see what she's doing. So let me stop sharing here. Heather, if you want to share.
I will share. All right. Can you see my screen? working, Jeff?
Yeah.
Great. All right, so you can see I've got different meditations here, and the one that Jeff just sent me is this one. So I'm going to click on it. So it finds my device right away. I just click on that.
To wear the Calibri, ensure that you have selected an appropriate.
So we do have instructions embedded in our platform that will help your client with any sort of troubleshooting issues they're having with the cap. But we do always recommend that the first time they use it, you do support them through that. And then through the training that you would do with Jeff and myself, we'd give you tips and tricks to help your client. So each of the neuro meditations comes with a little intro video. So I'm going to play that here. I'm actually going to turn it sideways.
Focused meditation, sometimes called concentration practice, is about learning to hold your attention on a single object. It's about developing a relationship with your mind and thought processes, helping the brain become more adaptive and flexible. The basic formula for this type of practice is to choose a target for your attention, such as the breath, a word or phrase that you repeat to yourself, or an image, such as a candle flame, the Buddha, or a mandala. As long as your full attention is on the target, you will receive consistent feedback. However, when the mind becomes distracted and caught in thoughts about the future or past, you will lose the feedback. While using this protocol, use the feedback to help increase your awareness. When the feedback begins to fade, look within to examine where your mind is. How has it shifted in obvious or subtle ways away from the state you were in previously? See if you can gently return your attention to a relaxed, focused state, allowing the feedback to naturally return.
Okay.
You don't have to watch that every time, but you know.
Do not, but it is there for your
But it's there.
client. So I could have just clicked proceed, for example.
So it's checking how good the signal is for that electrode. You see where the electrode is on the cap or on the little head map. So you have to have a signal that's stronger than 75 for it to allow you to run the session. So it's not going to let you run a session if you've got a bad signal. The audio's in the background again. Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So what it's doing right now is collecting baseline EEG data to figure out where to start the threshold.
We can choose whatever videos are there that you've set up for your clients. If they're using the YouTube option or if they're going to use their own, they can pick anything. I'm going to check the Mandela. It also shows the battery strength of your device, but you can see if I move, EEG is sensitive to movement. So if I start moving and talking, it affects my signal strength. So getting people comfortable before they start is important, but it comes back quickly. Something we have added is now you can make, the client can choose to make their protocol easier or harder. So you can now control the threshold from a distance. Normally it was just the clinician who could do this before, but with neuromeditation we found that you really need that ability to find yourself. So it's just the way I make this. moving is kind of dimming, but when I actually look in
Okay, so that gave you a quick idea of like what's happening on Heather's side as the meditator, right? Now, again, you could pick any kind of YouTube thing you want. You know, that just happened to be some, you know, like a pretty more upbeat kind of a thing. But you could see that she could change her difficulty to make it a little bit easier or harder, which gives a little bit of flexibility so that you don't have to be there all the time as the clinician. They've got some wiggle room. You may have to coach them a little bit on how to use that appropriately. You can also adjust the range of how much it dims and how much the audio changes so that you can get the amount of that change in a place that works for you. What I want to show you now is what I'm seeing on my side. So Heather is still meditating over there, sort of. And I can pull this up live. So here's her session right now. And so here's what we're doing. We're inhibiting alpha at PZ. That's the protocol. So here's her alpha activity in real time. When it's in the green zone, that's when she's getting a reward. When it's above the green zone, she's not getting a reward, right? Because we want to inhibit the alpha. We want the alpha to be low. So when it's down here, that's great. Now I can just see that Heather just made it. She just changed her threshold. I can see because the green line moved. Right? So I can see that in real time, but I can also adjust it on my side. So if I'm the therapist or the clinician and I'm watching this and I'm like, oh, this is, you know, way too hard or easy. And again, you can see the reward rate right here. So 33% is the reward rate. Now she's doing much better, right? Look at that. She's staying really solid right now. So maybe I want to make it harder. Right? Because it's like, oh, she's got this, right? Like we could make this a little harder. Well, I can change the threshold here. I can enter a number or I can toggle it down a little bit. So making it harder is going to, whoa, that was a little intense. Didn't mean to drop it that much. Sorry, Heather. It's taking it too big on me. I'll put it at 1. So you can see the green line moving. That's adjusting the threshold to make it harder or easier. So I can do that on my side, which is affecting her session, or Heather can adjust it as well, right? Like we both have that ability. So you can do that. This is the frequency spectrum. So this is her frequencies in her brain, you know, 0 up to 45. You can adjust that. So you could make it, make the range bigger or smaller of what you're looking at. And so you're kind of seeing it's going to move over time because it's averaging her activity. So you can look at this just to see what the overall dynamic is of the brain waves if you're interested in that. Here's her signal strength. This is a great thing to look at if you're the clinician, right? You're working with somebody and all of a sudden their signal strength is crapped out. Like you can see, right? You can see, uh-oh, you lost your signal. And so you might have to coach them on how to improve their signal or whatnot. This also gives you more confidence in what you're seeing from the brainwave perspective. If the signal is strong, you know you're getting good data. And then here's kind of the EEG time series down here. So you've got kind of, let me point out one more thing up here. So it's got this average reward duration. So how long is she getting a reward? Which basically means how long is she staying in the green, right? On average, she's staying there about 1.33 seconds, which sounds really short. Well, and it is short because this is a demo, right? It's a little hard to meditate when you're trying to teach at the same time. But the other thing is that the reality is that this is very sensitive. And so when you're meditating, sometimes we don't notice little shifts in our mental state. And sometimes they happen really fast. So the reality is a lot of times the mind is shifting very quickly in and out of kind of more of a mind wandering versus a focused state. So this other metric, this is one of my favorite metrics actually, this longest reward duration. So it's like, what's the longest that you were able to hold yourself in the desired state in this session? So in this case, it was 7 seconds. so far, right? So that's a great metric to look at progress, because one of the ways that you can see progress is, can you hold it longer, right? Can you, over time, can you develop your ability to stay in that meditative state for longer and longer periods of time? Okay. Heather, do you want to end your session just so that we can see what happens over here? So Heather's going to end her session. Oh, it's gone. Now, oh, it said aborted. Did you not save it?
Did I click the wrong thing?
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. So, no. So I can click on that, and now I can review the session. So this is saved data, right? So I can go through here and I can look at everything. I can toggle around. I can mess with stuff. I've got her overall performance. I've got all the data right here. Now, this was the first time we did this protocol, so I'm not going to be able to compare it to other sessions because it was brand new. But kind of like Heather was saying, if she had done this 3 or 4 times or whatever, you would have another way to look at this data that would compare all the sessions to each other. So you can kind of track everything together and look at change over time.
Look, Ma, no gel.
Look, yeah. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment and just, open it up, because, really we just wanted to give you a quick orientation to what this looks like, how simple it is, and then, kind of see what kind of questions you guys had.
So there is a question by Ali where she couldn't understand what was meant by difficulty, or what it was that became more difficult or less difficult.
Do you want me to answer that, or you want to answer it?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so when I was showing you guys on the screen where that green bar was, so what was so that's the threshold. So basically, if we're saying in this protocol that we want to decrease alpha, and by the way, the reason we want to decrease alpha is because lower alpha is associated with an external attention. Increased alpha is associated with an internal attention. So if I'm trying to externally focus on something like a candle flame or the kaleidoscope, I want that alpha to be low. So even if I'm looking at the kaleidoscope, but I'm in my head, I'm thinking about stuff, that alpha is going to jump up, right? So we want the alpha to stay low. So there's a line that's called the threshold. And the line basically says you got to stay below this line to get a reward. You got to stay below this. And so if that was set too easy, right, and Heather's below it the entire time, she's below it 100% of the time, she's not getting any feedback. So that's too easy. So if I made it harder, it's going to make that threshold lower. It's like, oh, you got to stay below this line, and I just dropped the line, right? So that's going to make it harder. Or on the other side, let's say it was already too hard, or kind of like in the example I just did, I hit the button too many times and it dropped it way too low. And it's like, she's never going to get a reward, right? You can't get below it. So now I need to make it easier, or Heather could make it easier, and it's going to make the threshold higher. It's going to give her more wiggle room on where her alpha can be to get a reward.
Yeah, limbo bar, high jump. Gotta get over.
Sorry, I want to clarify my question a little bit so I can hear the answer. I understand that there's a relationship between the complexity and difficulty of something, and that is related to the threshold, but I'm not sure what is being decreased or increased in difficulty. Are you talking about the complexity of the image being shown, or something else? It's not clear what is being increased or decreased in difficulty that is resulting in changes in the measurement. And yes, I know there's a threshold in there too. Does that make the question more clear?
So essentially it means I have to work harder to remain externally oriented as measured by that specific frequency, brainwave. Because it's an eyes open focus, so we're intended to be kind of focused on one particular thing, and every time your mind like wanders inside to self-referencing in this one, you will shift the state, and therefore you lose, like your frequency will change, and it will there go over top of what is supposed to be a limbo bar. So as we make the bar lower, I have to hold that state more or be able to orient more externally with less self-referencing for this particular meditation. So basically, my ability to hold that focus gets stronger if we make it more difficult. And that reward changes by the music gets quieter and the screen gets dimmer when I am not achieving the goal. And in time, we've talked about the ability to switch that, where actually everything gets quieter and darker as you achieve a state. The tricky thing, though, with operant conditioning and the way that our nervous systems work is we orient towards things. So that would be a much more advanced skill to not be rewarded by the reverse. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it sounds like you're adjusting the dimness of the image.
Yes, for this one.
For this
Yes.
one, and that affects the ease or difficulty. And you also adjust the challenge by adjusting the threshold. Understand. Thanks. That's helpful.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Dante was asking, do we have to be completely still to use them? Yes. EEG
pretty much
is a sitting still kind of thing. People can't be running and doing all these activities. I do think there are some like 19-channel head caps that have figured out how to remove some of that artifact, but it's just a completely different system for neurofeedback in and of itself. It is a subtle state awareness kind of training activity.
Yeah. And then Ken's got a question about, well, hey, if you got a client set up, and they can do this on their own, well, then there's no, where do I fit in, right? Like, I'm paraphrasing Ken, but it's a really good question. And so the clinician comes in a few different ways, potentially here, right? And Heather probably has a little bit of a different orientation on this than I do, but so we can both answer it. But for me, there's a couple of different things. So one, the client is going to have to compensate me for being on my platform. I got to pay for the platform, right? So I need to be getting some sort of compensation to even have them as a client in the first place, right? To even have them on this platform. And so there's different ways to do that, right? I like doing sort of a monthly fee. That's sort of an administrative fee, right? That's kind of like, well, because not only do I need to sort of have you on my platform, but also I have to manage that, right? So like anytime there's an issue or something comes up or you have a question, I got to deal with that. Right. So there's sort of an administrative fee that I like doing that I think is important. But then there's also the vast majority of people need some level of coaching. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's not necessarily just turning them totally loose. Now, I do have, really experienced people who have been doing this a long time and, you can kind of turn them loose. But most people, that's not the case. They want to be able to see the results, right, of their progress. Like, am I making progress? Because all the stuff that you see as on the clinician side, the client doesn't see all that. Now, we're gonna have some options very soon where the client can see more data, but they're not necessarily going to know what to do with it, right? So there's an element of coaching that comes in here, and so for me, I just charge my regular session rate for that. At the beginning, I might meet with them every week or every other week, and then it may get spaced out depending on what's going on. But then also, again, if you're using something like a questionnaire to evaluate things, you may have to go in there and make adjustments to the protocols. You may have to change the protocols. You may need to do a live session with them, right? So there's additional aspects of where, there's a way to actually make a living doing this, right? It's not just sort of giving it away. And that was the whole reason that this platform was developed this way, is because we don't necessarily want people just out there on their own. We want them to have some independence, but we also want them to have support. And that's our job. And I don't know if you want to add anything there, Heather.
Yeah, I would say there's different ways of going about this. And we have got a bunch of different folks using our platform globally, and some of them have really scaled practices in ways that are pretty impressive. And I think Divergence will put some information and webinars together about that, some of our more successful clinics and how they've scaled in that way. And on the back end, we are working on ways that certain automations come in that lower the intensity on the clinician and allow the client to participate a little more actively on their own, but then notify the clinician when certain key moments are coming in their training, if that client, for example, is a little bit more independent. And I would say either you rent headsets out to people and it's a finite amount of time, or if they're going to purchase a headset, there's conversations around like length of treatment and how long can we carry on and what will that cost be. And because we offer the coaching option, some clients can transfer into getting their own coaching platform, and then they can be set free to play with their own brainwaves using the NeuroMeditation Suite, and you could have been the person that kind of offered them into that. Clinically, I have a number of headsets that I lend out, but I also have a strong population of clients that have purchased them and continue working with me at different intervals and as they gain a little more independence.
I wanted to bring the slides back up. We can keep monitoring if there's any questions, but I realize we are
at the time.
at the time. So I wanted to kind of come back here for just a second, if I can. There we go. Just to let you guys know, right? Because the other issue is that it's like, okay, great. We've got this stuff, but how am I going to learn how to use it? Even though we kind of showed you. Sorry, my screens are acting wonky here. Did I just stop sharing?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. Why is it showing up like this? I'll just leave it here. So, some of you may be wondering like, well, how can I learn more? So we've actually developed a 6-week class. It's not self-paced. We meet every week for 6 weeks. And this is to walk you through the science, but also help you start to adjust and use each of the protocols yourself. Remember, there's 6 protocols, 6 neuromeditation protocols. So each week we focus on a different one. And the goal is that by the end, you're ready to roll and you can start working with other folks with this. So that's coming up. I'm also going to be doing a deep states workshop here in Eugene for a 3-day thing. And we're going to incorporate this into the workshop along with some other stuff. Some breath work and stroboscopic light experiences and some other cool stuff. But this is going to be a significant part of that, especially with some of the protocols like the deep states protocol. And then, Heather, do you want to talk about individual mentoring and group mentoring?
Sure. So the training that Jeff's going to be doing is kind of for everyone. So coaches and clinicians can kind of learn the basics and how to get onto the platform. Of course, anyone who's a clinician gets full access. We need to see a license for that. And coaches would get the coaching platform. And then I will be offering individual mentoring for any clinician that is working with clients and actually talking about, what might come up with someone with PTSD or dissociative states or anxiety. Because I've been just working with this for so long, I've really figured out how to use it as a really nice tool alongside your clinical work, especially within different like ACT, IFS, CBT models. And that will be based on people expressing interest, then I'll start setting aside some group mentoring options there.
Yeah.
And the Deep States workshop, I think it's attended for everyone. I don't know, Jeff, are you keeping it just to clinicians or is it open? No,
anybody can come to that. Yep. And all that stuff's on the website. So here's how you can get a hold of Heather and I. It's our website and email address. Hopefully I put the right email address for you, Heather.
Yeah, that's great.
Good.
So for US, for just private will be like $160. And then for groups, I think we're still figuring that out. It'd be like $80 a person. But feel free to email or to contact us for any further questions, and definitely keep an eye on both the NeuroMeditation Institute and Divergence social media, because we'll just be, I think a lot more stuff is going to be coming out in the next year.
Yeah. And if you have any additional questions or concerns or anything, just get in touch with one of us. We'll be happy to help you. Obviously, we want to make sure everybody understands what is going on, what their options are, and how to get more info if you're interested.
Yep. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks, guys.